The beautiful coastline of Scotland is adorned with an astonishingly diverse collection of islands. But inland, there's another treasure trove. Many of Scotland's freshwater lochs are studded with gems of their own, perfect worlds in miniature, and each with an island story to tell. I've always been drawn to islands, and in this series I'm setting out to explore Scotland's amazing island riches. In fact, there are over 280 offshore islands, big enough to lay claim to the name, and that's not counting the myriad of stacks and skerries that surround 6,000 convoluted miles of coast. But now I'm turning my back on the sea to discover the secrets of some of Scotland's landlocked islands. And to do this, I'm heading for the bonny banks of Loch Lomond. Loch Lomond lies at the heart of Scotland's first national park, just 18 miles from the centre of Glasgow and 45 miles from Edinburgh. For 60% of the country's population, this beautiful stretch of water is just an hour's drive away. For centuries, the natural beauties of this loch, which is the largest body of fresh water on the UK mainland, have attracted all manner of visitors. Heroes and villains, the great and the good, writers and artists have all beaten a path to these shores. In 1803, Dorothy Wordsworth, her brother William, and the poet Coleridge toured the loch. Dorothy was enchanted by the romance of the scene. What I had heard of Loch Lomond, she wrote, had given me no idea of anything like we beheld. It was an outlandish scene. We might have believed ourselves in North America. To fully appreciate just what Dorothy Wordsworth was writing about, and to get a fresh perspective on the romantic qualities of my destination, I'm going to do something she couldn't even have dreamed of. I'm going to take to the skies. Globe-trotting wildlife cameraman Richard Cook is a veteran microlight pilot. Hi, Richard. I meet up with him just a short flight from the southern shores of Loch Lomond. So tell me, do you think we're going to get a good bird's eye view from this?
You're going to get the best view of Scotland you're ever going to get from that.
Really?
It's fantastic. Up to 50 miles an hour. And we're airborne. It's amazing, isn't it? Fantastic.
Richard has filmed from microlights in lots of different and exotic locations, from the Peruvian jungle to the Dardanelles.
The variety is astonishing, isn't it? I mean, we're flying over some very flat land at the moment, but just ahead of us we can see the Highlands.
Exactly. In about 10 minutes flying, you can be on the top of Ben Lomond. You just don't get that anywhere else in the UK.
Seen from a height of 4,000 feet, the island-studded Loch Lomond makes a dizzying spectacle. It stretches for over 39 kilometres from north to south and covers 71 square kilometres of fresh water. But before the last ice age, when glaciers reshaped the landscape, Loch Lomond and its 30 islands were connected to the sea.
From up here, many of the islands seem to be in perfect alignment, strung out like charms on a bracelet across the surface of the loch. It's absolutely beautiful. The islands are actually part of a submerged ridge that was formed by the Highland fault line, which separates the hard rocks of the Highlands to the north from the soft rocks of the lowlands to the south.
Divided historically and culturally by its geography into highlands and lowlands, the loch and its islands are like a microcosm of the whole of Scotland. To understand this landscape more intimately, I need to get closer, so it's time to swap the element of air for the element of water. The first stop on my island-hopping grand tour is Inchcailloch, which lies close to the eastern shore near the picturesque village of Balmaha. Most of the islands on the loch are called Inch something or other. Now, Inch in Gaelic means island. Surprise, surprise. Now, Inchcailloch means the island of the old woman. And the old woman in question was an Irish princess who became a Christian missionary back in the 8th century. Now, history remembers her as Saint Kentigernach, and this is her island. There's an atmosphere here that hints at the sacred and the mysterious, a place for contemplation and prayer. This must have been what attracted St. Kentigernach to the island 1300 years ago. Nestling beneath the ancient trees are the remains of the religious centre she founded. There was once a nunnery here, and later a parish church. There's not much left of the old church now except the outline of its foundations, but for over 500 years, from the 12th to the 17th century, folk living on the east side of Loch Lomond worshipped here, and they brought their dead here to be buried. And long after the church fell into ruin, the old graveyard was still in use right up until the end of the Second World War. Many of the gravestones are inscribed with the names MacFarlane and MacGregor, two Highland clans intimately associated with the Loch and the islands. Gregor MacGregor, clan chief and uncle of the legendary Rob Roy, is buried here. And who knows, perhaps the bones of my own family's MacGregor ancestors are mouldering beneath these crumbling gravestones. Leaving Inchcailloch and its dead MacGregors and MacFarlanes, I'm rowing across the loch to the village of Balmaha to meet a man whose own connections with Loch Lomond and the islands go way back in history. Sandy MacFarlane owns the Balmaha boatyard, which has been in his family for generations. Hiring out these beautiful antique rowing boats is just part of Sandy's job. Now, Sandy, your family's got quite an interesting sideline to the boat hire business.
Aye, that's right, Paul. We deliver the mail round the islands that are inhabited in the loch.
Right. How long have you been doing that for?
That's been going on since about 1948, so that's 65 odd years.
Was that your great-grandfather, was it?
No, it was my grandfather that started that service, yeah. And that's something we're continuing to this day.
Sandy's mailboat is the good ship Marion, the same trusty craft that his grandfather skippered when this film was shot in 1968.
Alexander MacFarlane of Balmaha. Occupation, postman, but with one or two differences.
The continuity between past and present is almost uncanny. Like his grandfather, Sandy also enjoys the companionship of the family Alsatian, Kim. Back then, deliveries were made 3 times a week to the 3 occupied islands in all sorts of weather. Luckily, the similarities end there. We are blessed with a glorious day. Sandy, when your grandfather used to do this mail run, he took it quite seriously, did he not?
Oh, aye, it was a big thing for him, and he dressed very smartly in a, brass button tunic and a skipped hat with scrambled egg in the front of it. No, he definitely did take it very seriously indeed.
Today, we're heading straight for Inchmurrin, sailing by the string of islands I notice from the air. Torrinch and Creeinch are the high points of a submerged ridge, marking the boundary fault. To the north of them is Inchfad, the flat island, and home to Sandy's early ancestors.
Our oldest traceable ancestor, Duncan MacFarlane, he lived in Inchfad latterly, and he ran a government-run distillery on the island, believe it or not.
A government-run distillery?
Yeah, a proper government distillery, no moonshine for him. He was actually buried on Inchcailloch graveyard. In fact, he's buried with some honours, I have to say, because his gravestone is a proper sandstone flat stone with the Clan MacFarlane crest and motto.
Well, like a table.
And like a table, aye. In fact, you can sit on it and have a dram if one wishes to do so, and I have done myself with the family on many occasions.
Seems a very suitable way to honour your ancestors.
It certainly is, yes, and occasionally maybe even slop a bit of the dram over the gravestone in memory.
I'm sure he'd appreciate that.
I'm sure he probably would.
Ahead lies Inchmurren, the biggest island in Loch Lomond. But at just 1.5 miles long, it's still pretty small. Today, it has a permanent population of 10. Curiously, all of them are related. Braving the chill winds of spring, Dougal Scott takes me on a tour of his domain. His family have farmed here since the 1930s, and Dougal has lived here all his life.
Now, Dougal, I'm guessing that you're all Scots are living on Inchmurren.
Yep, yeah, we're all Scots.
You ever thought of changing the name of the island from Inchmurren to, I don't know, Scott Island?
Scotland, maybe, yeah. That would be
Scotland would be even better.
The Scots still farm on Inchmurren, but like many islanders, they've been forced to diversify. They have holiday lets, a restaurant, and occasionally they work on the mainland.
Do you never feel cut off and isolated?
Not really, we're not that cut off really. I could get to Glasgow in half an hour.
Half an hour?
Yeah, by road. And then there's another maybe 10 minutes for the boat journey.
Really?
15 minutes, yeah.
It's hard to imagine all the hustle and bustle of city life being so close by. Inchmurren looks and feels very remote. And to fully appreciate its island setting, Dougal takes me to his favourite viewpoint.
Wow, this really is quite a splendid and very special view. Dougal, look at that.
Yeah, you got a panoramic view right round the...
It's the Ben over there.
That's the Ben, yeah.
The 360-degree vista once made Inchmurren strategically important, which explains the ruins of the 13th century Lennox Castle. But long before that, this place was sacred to St Mirren, who gave his name to the island.
The saints loved islands, didn't they?
Still do.
Do you feel close to God up here?
As close as I'll ever be.
Yeah.
Life on the island hasn't always been easy for the Scots. I meet up with Dougal's mum, Anne, and sister-in-law, Dorothy. Anne tells me how her husband, Tom, earned a bit of extra cash in the old days.
Well, he went to all the big Highland games in Scotland. He and his brother both went and won a lot of prizes. They were quite famous for the heavyweight things and also for pole vaulting.
So there was prize money involved?
Prize money, yes,
Was that important to them at the time?
Oh, yes, very, very important.
Now, there's a fascinating picture here. Look at that. I mean, what's happening there? We've got...
That was when the loch was frozen. He walked over the loch, principally to get cigarettes for his mother.
She must have been desperate.
One winter was so severe that the island was bombed from the air with food parcels. But on a day like today, it's impossible to imagine the loch frozen over. Fair weather has always brought the boats and the tourists, and the loch has long been synonymous with leisure craft of all kinds. The boating craze began with the dawn of the steam age nearly 200 years ago, when people discovered the delights of cruising the loch on a paddle steamer.
The last steamer to sail among the islands was the Maid of the Loch, and that was over 30 years ago. And ever since then, this magnificent old paddle steamer has been moored here at Balloch Pier. Now this year is the Maid's 60th birthday, and she hasn't sailed since 1981, but hopefully that's about to change.
I've come on board to meet John Beveridge. For the last 3 decades, John's been campaigning to restore the old Maid to her rightful place as the queen of paddle steamers.
It was very popular, was it not, to come out here to Balloch and board the Maid of the Loch and go for a cruise?
Yes, really up until the last time she sailed, she was carrying 100,000 passengers a year. And over her lifespan, she's carried 3 million people.
50 years ago, a cruise on the Maid was a great day out and the most elegant way to explore the scenery of Loch Lomond and its beautiful islands. But the Maid's fortunes changed and her paddles haven't turned for decades.
She's had a very unfortunate past few years because she was sold in 1982 to a succession of private owners who didn't do anything with the ship at all. She was vandalised eventually because people stripped valuable metal and took all the interesting artefacts off the ship. And she was within days of sinking at the pier because she had become so waterlogged and vandalised.
With the Maid's very survival at stake, John came to the rescue and with the help of the local council, took the Maid into the safekeeping of a charity. The main priority today is to breathe life into the old girl's engines, which, despite the Maid's relative youth, were built to an original Victorian design from 1897.
Now, John, that's a very inspiring sight to any steam enthusiast.
Yep, this is the Maid of the Loch's compound diagonal steam engine.
Now, you told me that some very vital bits of the ship had gone missing when it was languishing here for a number of years. Was anything taken from the engine?
The engine was badly vandalised because a lot of the components were copper piping from the boiler through taking steam to the main engine and brasswork. So those are the two main things that people can reclaim money on.
And you're missing a boiler as well.
The boiler is the main...
It's a large item.
Just a slight question of the main item to get the ship sailing, yes.
John reckons that it will take £5 million to bring the Maid back to vigorous life. I hope he raises the money or finds a sugar daddy to set this charming old lady to rights. I'd love to see her paddles turning again. Balloch Pier, where the Maid has been moored for the past 4 decades, is also home to the Loch Lomond and Trossachs National Park Ranger Service. I've been invited by Park Ranger David Cameron to join him on patrol. Davy's job as ranger is a bit like being a speed cop, enforcing the bylaws that regulate the boating traffic on this vast sheet of water.
So how many people actually use the loch, do you know?
We have 5,000 to 5,500 powercraft registered on the loch every year. I think the highest count ever was over 1,000 boats in one day on Loch Lomond.
Now that's a pretty busy day.
It's a very busy day, yes. When it gets to those sort of peaks, we do what we can. We can't obviously be everywhere and dealing with every incident.
So that must take a wee bit of policing, I guess, to stop collisions and
it does
mishaps.
indeed, yes. We have our hotspots, places that people like to go.
One of the most visited boating locations on the loch is called the Narrows, an almost river-like channel between the islands. This is Davy's favourite stretch of water. As we thread our way through the Narrows, the peace and the tranquility are unexpectedly interrupted by the sight of the Loch rescue boat. Davy makes a call.
How you doing? It's Davy. Davy Cameron and the Brigadier. He's got a shout.
Davy, how you doing, mate? We just had a call about a boat sinking, aye?
Whereabouts?
Up at Inchmorron Island.
Okay.
Towards the Priory, 28-foot cruiser.
We join the high-speed dash to where the cruiser had radioed for help. We find her now aground off one of the islands. The crew have already abandoned ship and are waiting on the shore as their skipper makes a futile attempt to bail out his sinking vessel. The rescue boat goes in and brings them all to safety.
Well, lucky for them that we were here.
Absolutely. If for no other reason, I mean, it is a cold evening, we can get it looks like a couple of kids, we can get them on board and get them warm again.
The survivors look more embarrassed than endangered by their boating mishap. And thanks to the rescue boat's quick response, they don't need Davy's assistance on this occasion.
A memorable day for them.
I'm sure it will be. Hopefully one they don't want to repeat.
Continuing his patrol, Davy drops me off at the picturesque village of Luss on the western shores of the Loch. The view of the village and its bay inspired the poetic sensibilities of the early traveller Dorothy Wordsworth. Luss stood at the centre of a spacious bay where the boats of the inhabitants were lying at anchor, a beautiful natural harbour. The islands, as we looked down the water, are seen in great beauty.
When Dorothy Wordsworth came here in 1803, she felt that at last she had arrived in another country. She heard Gaelic spoken in the streets and saw wee boys dressed in plaid. For her, this is where the Highlands really began. When Dorothy visited Luss, it was a very different place from the conservation village we see today. There were no manicured flower beds. For the working folk of Luss, gardens were all about putting food on the table. Dorothy noted that there was not a single ornamented garden. We saw potatoes and cabbage, but never a honeysuckle. If she was disappointed with the floral display, Dorothy loved the wooded islands lying just offshore, especially Inch Tavanach, the Monk's Island, and that's where I'm heading next. It only takes a couple of minutes to cross the water to Inch Tavanach, which for the last 30 years has been home to a man appropriately called Roy Rogers. Famously, of course, Roy Rogers was a cowboy. Like his fictional namesake, this Roy Rogers also likes to ride the range. I join him to spend the day in the saddle, riding his horse Shoshone. So Roy, what is this with the cowboy hat, the spurs and the horses on a small island?
Well, it started a few years back, but I've always been extremely fond of horses. But a friend of mine taught me to ride Western, and I was absolutely hooked. It took about 2 to 3 minutes, and I was absolutely hooked and had Shoshone within 6 weeks.
Right.
And now we have 7 horses.
So you're really bitten by this bug in a big way.
Yes, yeah, very much so, yeah.
At one time, Roy combined working his farm with his job as a fireman on the mainland. Now, Inch Tavanach has his full attention.
So this is your range, really, Roy?
Yep. Out to check the stock, see how the sheep are, check the fences, do all the things cowboys do.
How big's Inch Tavanach, Roy?
It's about a mile long by about 1/4 mile wide, and roughly 200 acres.
So it's a small island?
Yeah, relatively small, yeah.
But it's your fiefdom in a way?
It is indeed, yeah. We're the only people that live here.
Have you any idea how long people have lived on this island for?
Yes, from our knowledge anyway, certainly since the Iron Age, and if not the Bronze Age before that.
Down the centuries, Druids, Celtic saints, Vikings and monks have been drawn to this magical island. Riding the range with Roy, I begin to understand its allure.
It's my own little kingdom. It's just the most beautiful places to live. Enjoy the solitary part of it too, but I mean, I love company. Just everything about it, really. It's living on my own, having to be independent of everything usually, more or less.
You have to be, I imagine, very self-reliant and resourceful.
Yeah, we have had our self-sufficiency sort of thing, where we had our own cows and we used to make our own cheese and butter. We had goats.
But Inch Tavanach cheese?
Yes. Oh, I tell you, it was goat's cheese. It was absolutely beautiful stuff.
Spurring our horses on, we gallop the full length of Roy's domain to enjoy one of his proud views.
This is not a bad view though, is it?
It's gorgeous, isn't it? The Ben, bit of a breeze on the loch, and the scent that it brings you. Can you smell it? Fresh, really, really fresh.
I can only smell horse, to be quite honest with you.
Roy has a novel way of getting rid of the smell of horse sweat after a long day bouncing in the saddle. And I'm surprised and delighted to see that it's a technique that takes full advantage of this island location.
Oh, she's swimming now, look, there she goes.
Swimming the horses is something that Roy and his partner Susie do all year round. In the water, Shoshone looks like a mythical seahorse as she surges forward.
It's a great thing actually, because not only does it wash all the sweat off, but it really does physically relax it, but more than anything, relaxes them mentally. And that to me is the biggest thing about it, is the mental side.
Have you done it with other horses as well?
Yes, lots of horses, for all sorts of reasons. Cardiovascular, we had one with a snake bite and didn't know if we could do anything for it. And the vet who sent the horse to us had worked with a horse before that, and it had taken nearly 6 months before it got back to work. So we said, well, we'll give it a shot. And within a fortnight, we had it sent back to work.
So swimming is really therapy for horses?
Absolutely.
Well done. Well done, Shoshone. Well, that's a sight I didn't expect to see.
Back on dry land once again, it's time for me to take the high road. And what better way to end a grand tour of these islands than by climbing the mountain that gave the loch its name, Ben Lomond. Ben Lomond is the most southerly of Scotland's famous Munros, mountains over 3,000 feet. And being so close to Glasgow, it has for many years been the most popular and most climbed of them all. In fact, about 30,000 people clamber up to the summit every year. They say that from the top you can see half of Scotland, the coast of Ireland, and even the mountains of the Lake District in England. So it should be worth the effort.
Sadly for national pride, the first recorded ascent of the Ben was made by a group of Cambridge University students in 1756. William Burrell and chums were determined to conquer the peak, but Burrell himself was overcome with vertigo just a few hundred feet shy of the summit. His friends bashed on and celebrated their achievement with lashings of ginger beer.
It's true that the early climbers totally exaggerated the seriousness of the climb. There was talk of thin air, altitude sickness, and terrifying cliffs that made even the strongest heads swim with vertigo. Such claims seem to have been endorsed by early paintings of the mountain, which make the Ben look more like the Matterhorn. In reality, the climb is little more than a long, stiff walk, though I might be tempted to agree with one early climber who said it was impossible to get to the top without the aid of a whiskey flask.
Here we are, the top at last, and in keeping with tradition, just kiss the summit cairn as you do. Now sadly, I've left my whiskey flask behind. I've only got ginger beer to toast this fabulous view and to reflect on all the islands that I visited. Each one a perfect world in miniature. Slange.
On my next grand tour, I'm setting sail to explore the small isles of the Hebrides.